My name is Riley, 35 years old, a civil engineer living alone in the suburbs of Seattle. That day, all I wanted was to host a small get-together to celebrate finally buying my first house after nearly 10 years of hard work. But the moment I opened the door, my two cousins, Heather and Madison, showed up with suitcases in hand, grinning like they were moving in. Right in front of all my friends, they announced, "We're starting a new chapter in Riley's house." Everyone applauded, and I just stood there frozen. No one asked if I agreed. Have you ever had your own family dismiss your right to your own space? They walked in like my life was public property. If you've ever been put in that position, leave a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so I can tell you what happened next. After they realized the house wasn't as simple as they thought, I stood there in the middle of my own party, watching Heather beam into her phone while Madison casually posted a story that read, "New chapter begins at my cousin's place." The house I had signed over just 3 days ago, hadn't even hung the first curtain yet, was suddenly the stage for their so-called rebirth. But honestly, looking back, none of it should have surprised me. We grew up in a big family where laughter and sacrifice blurred together like it was the norm. I remember clearly when my mom got sick. I was only 23. I just graduated college and was excited about starting a job at an environmental engineering firm. But 3 months in, Mom collapsed from a stroke. Taking care of her became a full-time job. My dream got shelved. I worked day shifts at a water testing lab, night shifts at a Japanese diner, and cleaned offices on weekends. Calling it living would be generous. It was survival. Some months, Mom's medications cost twice what I earned. I sold my laptop, then the old scooter my dad had left behind. When there was nothing left to sell, I borrowed. First from banks, then from people I knew. Everything was under my name. And those relatives who once said, "Let us know if you need anything, family helps family," they vanished. Heather was the first to call when she found out I qualified for a medical assistance loan. Her voice was sweet, almost pleading. "I just need your name on the paperwork. I'll pay it off little by little. Can you help with the application?" I foolishly agreed. 2 months later, the bank called about missed payments. When I called her, Heather had already blocked me. She sent one short message, "I'll pay when things settle." It took nearly 4 years for me to finish paying off that loan, with interest, without ever seeing a dime from her. Madison was a different story. She didn't ask for money. She just needed a place to recover after breaking up with her boyfriend. I let her stay in my small rental a year after Mom passed. Within a week, neighbors were knocking on my door complaining about EDM blaring at 2 in the morning. I came home from work to find 3 strangers sleeping in my living room, while Madison live-streamed herself cooking and promoting some detox product. When I confronted her, she squinted at me and said, "You're too uptight. I thought you'd want more energy in the house." Then, as if to reassure me, she added, "I told everyone it's your place. You're getting famous by association." For a long time, I believed staying silent was the easiest way to avoid conflict. Every time I pushed back, Aunt Denise, their mom, would call or text saying things like, "Family comes first. Especially women, we have to be understanding." She'd always remind me, "You're the only one in this family with an education and a job." Heather and Madison, they're softer. They need a safety net. Never once did she ask how I was holding up. Back when I was caring for Mom, Aunt Denise visited exactly 3 times. Once with a fruit basket still carrying a store label. The other 2 times she brought friends and expected me to cook for them. I did. I smiled. I thought if I just tried a little harder, maybe things would change. But people who always put burdens on others don't change easily. When Mom died, only Ethan, my one true friend, stayed by my side through the hospital and the funeral. Heather didn't show, claiming she had a booth at a fair. Madison came but left early because her boyfriend was waiting at the airport. Aunt Denise arrived late and, standing in front of Mom's photo, said flatly, "Now that your mom's gone, you should start thinking about settling down. That apartment of yours, maybe let Heather rent it for a while. No point in wasting space." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't speak. Not from sadness, but from disbelief. Disbelief that I ever thought these people were home. From that day forward, I chose silence. I worked extra shifts, saved every penny, applied for a housing grant for single women engineers. Month after month, I laid another brick in the dream I built for myself. A house, mine alone, a space no one could enter unless I invited them. And now, with two people who once used me as a crash pad casually unpacking suitcases in my living room, making lists of decor, even inviting friends over to tour their new place, I understood. If I didn't act now, every year I struggled to build something of my own would be wiped away. I didn't raise my voice. I simply pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and started recording. Every step they took, every laugh, every word about starting their new life here. Because this time no one would rewrite the truth. Monday morning, I'd barely stepped out of my bedroom when I heard soft meditation music and Madison's airy voice floating in from the living room. I thought she was listening to a podcast. But when I turned the corner, I froze. She was sitting cross-legged on a yoga mat, her phone set up on a tripod, ring light glowing bright. Behind her, the wall I hadn't even had time to paint. On the screen, hearts fluttered and comments poured in. She smiled sweetly, voice like a chant. Let the healing energy flow into your chest. Today's livestream class accepts donations via Venmo. Links in the bio. I stood there for nearly a minute, stunned. No one had asked if I was okay with this. If I was comfortable. The house I'd barely started to call home was now a stage for selling synthetic peace. I quietly stepped in, trying not to disrupt the energy. When she finished her line about hip release, she glanced over, saw me, and quickly ended the stream with a bright smile. You're up early. The women in this morning's class love your space. I'm thinking of starting a new series, Healing in Real Homes. Then, as if remembering something, she added, Oh, can you keep quiet for about 45 minutes each morning? I need a stable environment for the energy. I swallowed the urge to laugh and said calmly, Madison, this is my home. You can't use my personal space for live streaming without asking. She smiled softly like I was being silly. Sweetie, don't you see? We're making this place come alive. It was so empty before we arrived. I'm just helping activate its energy. I said nothing more. I knew that language too well. Those faux spiritual phrases designed to mask entitlement. That evening when I returned from work, the back door wouldn't open. My key didn't fit. I tried 3 times before circling to the front. Heather was sipping tea on the porch. She waved. Oh, I changed the lock on the back door. The old one was loose, kind of dangerous. I left the new key on the kitchen counter. I walked in silently. Later, I tested the new key, then asked, Why didn't you tell me before changing the lock? Heather shrugged. Just trying to help. They say women living alone should be careful. And I mean, we're living here now too, right? Not a big deal. I looked her straight in the eye. No one ever agreed you could live here. This isn't a shared home. She shot up from her chair, face turning from relaxed to furious in an instant. So you're kicking us out? You're saying we're not welcome? Without waiting for my reply, she grabbed her phone and FaceTimed someone. Aunt Denise's familiar face appeared on the screen. Before she could say anything, Heather burst into tears. Auntie, Riley says we can't stay here anymore. Madison and I just started to settle in and now she's kicking us out. What? Aunt Denise's voice cracked with disbelief. Riley, what's going on? Just the other day you were happily inviting them in and now you've flipped? Are you really going to leave your own blood out in the cold? I gripped my phone tightly and looked her straight in the eye. I never invited anyone to stay. I invited them to a party. Staying was their decision. She stared back, eyes sharp with judgment. You're being so cold, Riley. Family isn't about calculations. They're your cousins. Heather just lost her job. Madison went through a breakup. They have nowhere else to go. I wanted to say that Heather didn't lose her job. She quit because she wanted to follow her spiritual path. And Madison? She has 3 credit cards and an Instagram account with nearly 200,000 followers. But I said nothing. I knew that no matter how many facts I laid out, the woman staring at me through that screen would still say the same thing. Riley, I've taught you since you were little. Family comes first. You're the older one. You have a responsibility. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. No one is obligated to sacrifice forever just because they were born first. I've spent 10 years carrying the weight of this family, and now I just want to live right in the house I bought with my own sweat and silence. Aunt Denise didn't say anything for a moment. On the other side, Madison had stepped into the frame, sniffling and wiping her eyes. Auntie Riley's changed. She doesn't smile or hug us like she used to. She feels like a stranger. I felt a wave of dizziness rise to my head. Maybe because I'd heard that line too many times. That I had changed. That I wasn't easygoing anymore. That I didn't stay quiet anymore. But no one ever asked, can anyone stay the same after being trampled on for so long? I ended the call. And in that moment, as the phone screen went black, I saw myself at 24 again, slumped beside my mom's hospital bed, holding a debt notice while trying to choke down a cold piece of bread. No one called me family when I needed help. But now when I seek peace, they invoke blood ties to keep intruding. I stood up, walked to my room, shut the door, and knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I didn't act now, this house would never truly be mine. I sat in my home office, door shut tight, soft yellow light from my desk lamp casting shadows on the open laptop in front of me. The sounds outside were still there. Madison giggling during a FaceTime call, saying, "This house's energy helps her sleep deeper." Heather pacing the hallway, speaking on the phone like this was her apartment. I didn't feel angry anymore. The anger had faded yesterday. What remained in me now was a cold, sharp clarity. I opened my contacts, scrolled to the familiar name, Ethan Bennett. He was the one who saw me go from a student who quit her job to care for her mom, to an engineer working 3 back-to-back shifts. Ethan had been my closest friend since college, and now he was a civil attorney at a small but reputable firm in Washington state. I tapped call. Riley. Ethan's voice came through after 2 rings, surprised but calm as always. I need your help. There was a brief pause. Heather and Madison? Yeah. They still haven't left? Not only haven't they left, they changed the locks, took over the rooms, started live streaming healing sessions, and got Aunt Denise to call and accuse me of being ungrateful. Classic, Ethan sighed. Then added, I'm guessing you don't want to go nuclear on this? I just want to do what's right. Ethan paused for a few seconds, then his tone shifted into something more formal. I remember reviewing the paperwork when you applied for this house. It was part of the grant for Single Women Engineers program. You remember the residency clause, right? I closed my eyes and nodded even though he couldn't see me. No one besides the listed homeowner and officially documented residents can stay longer than 7 consecutive days. Exactly. And that clause is legally binding. If it's violated, you could lose ownership. The housing authority has the right to revoke the grant if the property is being misused. I listened to every word like they were slicing through me. I'd spent nearly 10 years of my life to earn this house. And now, just because of some guilt-ridden lectures about family, I was at risk of losing it all? Ethan, I said, my voice dropping, if I follow through with reporting them, would that make me cruel? I heard the creak of a chair, then Ethan replied firmly, cruel would be letting them stay and watching you lose what you paid for with your youth. You're not kicking them out, they're squatting. You're not being dishonest, you're following your contract. The only cruelty here is the entitlement they think they're owed. I clenched my fingers and looked away from the window. Outside, Madison sat on the porch with her laptop open, typing quickly with one hand while the other held a lemon ginger drink. Every time I saw her working, I knew she was creating content for her inner healing community. I wondered how many of her followers knew she was living in a house she had no right to be in. So what do I do now? I asked. Ethan answered slowly, like flipping through legal documents in his mind. Step 1. I'll send you a template for a formal notice of residency violation with legal effect. Print it, sign it, post 1 copy in the living room, and email another to both Heather and Madison. After that, start documenting their activity. Live streams, guests, how long they've stayed. Everything needs to be recorded. That'll be your evidence if it goes to court. I opened my notes file. Started yesterday. Not surprised. I'll also contact the local office of the grant program to ask about official procedures for reporting violations. If needed, they can send out an inspector. But we'll only go that route if you want a fast resolution. If you're hoping they'll back off quietly, I've got another plan. I looked up. What plan? Ethan chuckled. I'll reach out to a moving company I trust. Discreet. We'll prepare a mock relocation. Let them think you've arranged a moving truck to help them get settled elsewhere, or where they think they're moving. In reality, all their stuff will go to a licensed storage unit. Their belongings will be kept there for 30 days. If they don't pay the fees or pick them up, the items will be handled per legal procedures. Everything will be documented, No one can accuse you of stealing a thing. I felt a chill run down my spine. I saw a way out, clear, legal, and immune to emotional manipulation. Ethan, I asked, are you sure? This doesn't feel too harsh. I'm sure. Because if they respected you, you wouldn't be calling me right now. I sat in silence for a long moment, then opened my laptop and clicked Ethan's email. The subject line read, Notice of Residency Violation, Housing Grant Clause 4.3b. The message included a fillable template and instructions for submitting both physical and digital copies. It wasn't a threat. It was a process. I carefully filled in each field, checked the dates, and posted one notice on the fridge and another on the living room door. Madison walked out, squinted at the paper, and read aloud, Notice of Violation? I turned to her, my voice steady. It's about exceeding the residency limit in a grant-protected home. You and Heather have overstayed. You're kidding, right? Madison scoffed. You're saying we broke the law just by living with you? Not because you lived with me. Because you weren't allowed to. Madison opened her mouth to say something else, then shut it. She pulled out her phone and went back to her room, clearly rattled. I heard Heather call from the kitchen. Madison? What's going on? I'm making pineapple detox for tomorrow. I looked at the notices I just posted and felt no guilt at all. It was time to reclaim what should have always been mine. And I knew this plan, the quiet plan, was the first step toward doing just that. Saturday morning, I woke up to the soft clinking of wind chimes in the backyard. When I pulled back the kitchen curtain, I saw Madison laying out a yoga mat, propping a Bluetooth speaker on the stone bench and adjusting her phone on a tripod. Next to her was a handwritten sign in marker. Detox yoga class, fresh energy for the new week, $25 per person. Below it was her personal Venmo QR code with a note. No cash accepted. I stepped outside. The morning breeze was cool and refreshing, but inside I felt ice cold. About 6 unfamiliar women, all dressed in light-colored workout clothes, were beginning to meditate. Madison looked up, formed a heart with her hands in front of her chest, and whispered, Don't disrupt my energy, sis. I'm live. I said nothing. I just stood there, staring at the backyard I'd once dreamed of filling with lavender and tomatoes, maybe a row of small wooden chairs for reading. Now it was a makeshift studio for someone using my home as a source of income, without ever asking me. When the deep meditation ended and her guests left, Madison walked into the kitchen to grab some water and said casually, I'm doing a breathwork class tomorrow. Heather thinks I should name it Inner Flow. What do you think? You're using my home to run a personal business, I said, my hand still wrapped around my coffee mug. You never asked for permission. Madison smiled like I'd just said something naive. Come on, healing isn't a business. I don't charge fees, I accept donations. And I don't bring people inside the house. I keep everything really clean. I was about to respond, but the front doorbell rang repeatedly. When I opened the door, there was Heather holding 2 large duffel bags, and behind her was a man I recognized immediately. Derek, Heather's boyfriend. The same man who, 3 years ago, secretly took photos of my bathroom during a party. I'd blocked his number as soon as I found the pictures posted on an anonymous Instagram account. I never brought it up because I didn't want to stir the pot. But now here he was, standing at my door with a suitcase and a forced smile. Hey Riley, long time no see. Heather said you've got a spare room. We're just crashing for a few weeks to save on rent. I'm super low maintenance, you won't even notice we're here. Heather jumped in, Don't worry sis. It's temporary. Derek just lost his lease. The utilities at the old place were outrageous. We can sleep in the living room. I stood in the doorway, calm but firm. No one else is staying in this house. You know the conditions in the contract. Heather sighed and turned to Derek with a shrug. She's my sister. Just a little stubborn. Stubborn. I repeated, each syllable catching in my throat. No, I'm not stubborn. I'm protecting what's mine, something you've never shown an ounce of respect for. Derek gave a weak chuckle. All right, we'll leave our stuff in the car. Just let Heather grab a few things. As they backed off, I hadn't even exhaled when my phone rang. It was a FaceTime call from Aunt Denise. I hesitated a few seconds, then answered. Riley, do you have a minute? The whole family wants to talk. We need to clear the air. I saw a few familiar faces on the screen. My cousin Lana, Uncle Mark, and of course Heather holding the phone from her end. "What's going on, Auntie?" I asked, trying to stay polite. Aunt Denise didn't dance around it. "I heard you're not letting Heather and Madison stay? And Derek just needs a roof over his head for a few weeks? I think maybe you should sign a long-term cohabitation agreement. Give them a chance to get back on their feet. You have a house, a steady income. They're struggling for now." "What agreement?" I frowned. Heather turned the camera to show a printed document. At the top it read, "Conditional Cohabitation Agreement." The summary granted Heather and Madison and any accompanying individual the right to stay in my home for a minimum of 6 months, rent-free, with a vague clause about assisting with household needs. There was even a line promising respect for the homeowner's privacy. I gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're turning my home into a boarding house?" Aunt Denise's tone hardened. "Watch your attitude. I didn't call to argue. I want you to think bigger. You live alone, always buried in work. Wouldn't it be nice to have company?" "I'm not lacking company. I'm lacking space that's respected." Heather cut in. "Come on, sis, we're not trying to bother you. We just thought you actually cared about us." I looked directly into the screen. Caring doesn't mean enduring. Family doesn't mean you get to invade someone else's life. Madison appeared beside Heather, dabbing fake tears. "Riley, if you sign it, I promise I'll move some stuff out. I just need space to breathe." I hung up without another word. I'd heard enough. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They were turning kindness into entitlement, silence into consent, and now they wanted to turn my ownership into emotional currency. I walked back inside and called Ethan. His voice came through steady as always. "Ready?" I answered plainly. "Let's do it. Move to the next phase of the plan." By 3 a.m. I lay in the dark, gripping my phone, eyes fixed on the soft glow of the screen and the subject line of Ethan's email. "Urgent. Official housing contract violation warning." I read each word like it was a declaration of war, one I had to win at all costs. Ethan kept it short, sharp. "Riley, this is the official notice drafted per the grant for single women engineers. If a residency violation is discovered, including allowing anyone not listed on the lease to stay over 7 consecutive days, your home may be temporarily seized and your ownership reviewed. You must collect evidence of violation within the next 72 hours before they initiate a surprise inspection." I lay still for several minutes. Outside my room, the house was quiet, but I knew Heather was sleeping in the living room with Derek, and Madison had already started calling the backyard her healing energy studio in recent stories. They were living as if I didn't exist. Or worse, as if I were the temporary tenant in my own home. I jumped up and walked straight into my office. Opened the laptop and began collecting evidence. First, Instagram. Madison's account was @MadisonHealsia, where she posted daily about life in a high-vibration home in North Seattle. Every story was clear proof. Shots of the living room, yoga mats everywhere, morning meditation classes, videos of her laughing with friends in the kitchen, captioned, "Finally found where I belong." I downloaded every story, every reel, every caption. Then moved to Heather's Facebook, where she'd posted a photo of Derek installing a new TV in my living room with the caption, "Home setup coming together. Thanks to my sweet cousin for giving us a place to restart." Dozens of congratulatory comments followed, none of them knowing they never had my permission. Next were texts and chats. I pulled up my messages with Heather where she clearly said, "We'll only stay a few months till things settle." Another from Madison sent right before her last yoga class. "Can you close the backyard blinds for me?" The glare messes with my client's focus. I saved everything, categorized it. Photo evidence, written messages, video recordings. Nothing left out. I sent it all to Ethan with a short note. "Prepare next steps." Early the next morning, I quietly installed small cameras in 4 places. Corner of the living room, backdoor entrance, main hallway, and the front porch. All pointed at shared spaces. None invaded private areas. I double-checked the angles, ensured clarity, then linked them to the remote monitoring app. Part of me felt cold, like I was turning my home into a surveillance station. But another part knew, if I didn't do this, they would be the ones in control, even over what rightfully belonged to me. Just as I finished placing the last camera, I heard flip-flops shuffling down the hallway. Madison was headed to the kitchen, hair in a messy bun, holding a pillow, sleepy-eyed but still clutching her phone. She saw me and smiled. "You're up early," she said softly. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, then turned back to the coffee machine. Madison opened the fridge, grabbed a detox water bottle labeled for class use only, then continued, "Hey, I've got a new yoga class tomorrow afternoon. Lots of new clients, even someone flying in from Portland. I'm thinking about adding an evening meditation package. I'll need to start diffusing oils by 6 o'clock. Can you turn on the heater early for me?" I turned and looked at her for a long moment, trying to gauge how much of that sentence was thoughtless and how much was intentional. But all I said was, "Madison, do you realize you're using someone else's home to run a business and you haven't paid a single dime?" Madison's eyes widened like I'd just insulted something sacred. "Wait, what are you saying?" "I'm making the house more alive. I'm connecting people to energy. Do you think money is the only thing that matters?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her for another second, then walked out of the kitchen, leaving a heavy silence behind me. That afternoon I checked the cameras for the first time. Heather was sitting on the couch, legs up on the new coffee table I had just bought. Derek paced between the living room and hallway, carrying a power cord and a drill. On the footage I saw him drill directly into my wall to install a shelf, without asking anyone. I paused the frame, zoomed in on his face, then took a screenshot. Each photo was a piece of evidence, a part of the case I was compiling to send to the grant program's legal office. I knew there would come a day when they'd have to sit across from a lawyer, and every word they had said online would be compared against it. When Ethan texted, "How's it going?" I responded with one photo, Heather taking a selfie with the caption, "Building a home with him." In the background was my fridge with my name still posted on the sticky note beside it. Ethan replied with just 3 words, "This is perfect." I put my phone away and looked out back. A new group of people was arriving, yoga mats in hand, bright smiles on their faces. Madison greeted them with nods, shoulder pats, warm words, like the host of a wellness retreat. Me. I was still the one behind the glass, watching my home being redefined by someone else. But that was okay. They didn't know that every step they took across that floor was already being recorded. And very soon they'd be reviewing every one of those frames, from the other side of the law. Just before dawn, with the porch light still flickering against the gray sky, a moving truck quietly pulled up in front of my house. The driver, Marcus, solid build, stepped out holding a clipboard and nodded at me. "We're right on time." The list of items was confirmed over email. I opened the door and kept my voice low. As quiet as possible. "They're still asleep." 3 movers followed behind Marcus and headed into the house, each with a specific task. One for Heather's belongings in the living room, one to collect all of Madison's props from the backyard, and one for shoes, handbags, and electronics scattered across the dining room and hallway. I had marked everything ahead of time, listed each item by name, and was filming the entire process from packing to sealing the boxes. I stood still in the doorway, hands wrapped gently around my hot coffee mug, silently watching each corner of the house slowly be returned to me. Clean. Like it had been before everything was taken over. The first scream echoed from upstairs. "What is going on?" Madison came storming down the stairs, hair wild, wearing only a nightshirt, her bare feet stumbling on the cold floor. "Who said you could touch my stuff?" I didn't turn around. I stood at the door watching Marcus check off each sealed box. Madison lunged toward a box being carried through the front porch and screamed, "Put that down." I didn't give permission. Ethan stepped out from a car parked across the street, holding a thick folder. He wore a gray coat, thin-rimmed glasses, and a calm face like he was just walking into an early meeting. "Good morning, Madison," Ethan said, voice steady. "Could you pause for a moment while I read you a brief statement?" Madison spun around, eyes wide. "Who are you?" "I'm legal counsel for the owner of this home, Riley Carter. Under Clause 4.3b of the contract for the grant for single women engineers, no individual not listed on the official agreement may reside in this home for more than 7 consecutive days. You and Heather have been here for 11 days straight. Furthermore, you've been using this property to conduct unauthorized commercial activity and allowing unapproved visitors into private premises." Madison went pale. I was just offering healing." "You collected payments through Venmo," Ethan said flatly. We have videos, receipts, and Instagram stories as proof. You also acknowledged in a message that you were planning an intensive meditation course next week. Heather came rushing in from outside, still in workout clothes, eyes blazing. What is this crap, Riley? You're throwing us out with legal tricks now. I turned to face her. It's not a trick. I just stopped being blind. She gritted her teeth. You're humiliating us. Taking away our shelter. Destroying our trust. You think I'll let this slide? I'll sue. Go ahead, Ethan answered calmly for me. We've documented everything. Photos, videos, audio recordings, social media content, and a full inventory of all items brought here without a cohabitation agreement. If needed, Riley can counterfile for trespassing and unlawful use of her home. Heather hesitated, then looked at Madison. Call the cops. Madison whipped out her phone, dialing with shaky fingers. I'm being evicted. They're taking all my stuff without warning. I didn't stop her. I just stood there while Ethan nodded slightly at me. Let them call, he whispered. About 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of the house. 2 officers, one male, one female, stepped out, expressions neutral but firm. As they approached, Madison rushed over, tears streaming. They're taking everything. I live here. I have rights. The female officer asked, Do you have a lease agreement? Madison froze. No, but I've been here for 2 weeks. I'm her cousin. The male officer turned to me. Are you the homeowner? I'm Riley Carter, I said. This house is part of a housing support program. No one besides me is allowed to reside here long term. I have a lawyer, full documentation, and the entire move is being recorded. They were notified and refused to leave. Ethan stepped forward and handed over the documents. Here's a copy of the contract and the prior legal notice. You can verify everything with the city legal office. The officers reviewed the paperwork, exchanged a few words. Then the female officer turned back to Madison, her voice firm but gentle. Legally, you have no right to remain here. You need to vacate the premises today. If not, we'll have to proceed with enforcement. Madison burst into tears. I can't believe this is happening. Heather stood silently, eyes furious. No more threats. No more mockery. Just seething rage that had nowhere to go. I didn't say another word. I simply watched as they both retreated from my home, leaving behind the sealed boxes waiting to be sent to storage. Marcus nodded at me. We'll be done in 15 minutes. I gripped the handle of my mug a little tighter. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pity. I felt one thing only, peace. Like I had just closed a door that should never have been opened. Sunday afternoon, I drove slowly down the familiar road leading into the southern suburbs of the city, where Aunt Denise's house sat quietly, as if no one had spent the past week shouting inside it. The white-painted wooden gate still looked carefully maintained, but something told me that today it was about to witness things far from careful. My grandmother, Grandma Joan, had returned from Idaho following a message from my younger brother Jacob, the only person in our family who still seemed to have any sense left. I knew Grandma was the one voice that could silence the whole room, at least for the first 30 seconds. Beyond that, I wasn't expecting much. I stepped into the living room where everyone had already gathered. The air felt thick, like they had just paused a heated argument to give me space to walk through the door. Heather sat with her arms crossed, her face cold. Madison kept her head down, tears already on standby like someone had cued her. Start crying at minute 3. Aunt Denise sat in the middle, holding a stack of printed papers, probably a pre-written statement. Grandma Joan sat at the head of the room, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes sharp enough to cut through silence. So you finally made it, Aunt Denise said, not angry, just cold as stone. Riley, you know why we're here today, don't you? I'm guessing it's for the usual accusations, I replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down, my eyes locked on Grandma. Heather jumped in first. You've destroyed everything. This family was never perfect, but at least we had each other. And now what? Madison and I were thrown out like criminals, humiliated in front of the whole neighborhood. You think that's fair? Madison sniffled, ready for her cue. I had to delete all my social media. People are calling me a scammer. I lost all my clients. My mental health is wrecked. Aunt Denise nodded and gently laid the paper on the table like she was about to read a formal indictment. Riley, you chose law over love. You turned your back on your family. And now you've even brought outsiders, lawyers, police, into your home to disgrace your own blood. I looked at each of them. They were speaking with such genuine outrage, but none of them mentioned the cause. No one asked how long I had endured, how many times I had been trampled on. Each complaint made it sound like I was the only wrongdoer in a family that could do no wrong. I said nothing. I placed the laptop I had brought onto the table and opened a prepared video file. The first screen showed Heather drilling screws into my wall, with Derek's voice laughing in the background. She's gonna flip when she sees this hole. Next clip. Madison live streaming with a camera set up in the backyard, the sunlight harsh behind her. Today's class is full. My cousin's house is like a perfect studio. Haven't asked her yet, but it's fine, she's chill. I moved quickly to an audio clip from a previous call, where Aunt Denise's voice slipped. Just stay a few months. She lives alone. Sooner or later she'll soften. She always does. The screen went black. The room went silent. I took a deep breath and spoke calmly. No one was kicked out. You all crossed boundaries and assumed no one would stop you. Heather stood up, her voice cracking with anger. What do you want now? For us to have nothing? I looked at her, voice steady but firm. I don't want you to have nothing. I just want back what was always mine. Peace. The right to control the home I spent my youth building. Madison buried her face in her hands, sobbing like she was playing a well-rehearsed role. I just wanted to be accepted. I have no one else. That's when Grandma Joan finally spoke. She set her teacup down, stood slowly, and walked to the center of the room. Enough. No one said a word. She scanned the room, her gaze clear and unflinching like a blade. Denise, she turned to her daughter, when did you start teaching your children that taking advantage of someone else's hard work was acceptable? I just wanted them to have a stable life, Aunt Denise began. By living off someone else? Grandma cut her off. Do you think she doesn't get tired? Do you think she doesn't get lonely? And yet she didn't say a word, until every line was crossed. She turned to me, her eyes softening. Riley, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. But today I want to make it clear, I stand with you. My heart pounded. Not because I had won, but because someone in my family had named the truth. She turned back to Heather and Madison. You two need to relearn everything. What kindness means. What respect means. Aunt Denise tried to rise, but Grandma simply lifted a hand, signaling her to stay seated. No one here has the right to lecture Riley until you've learned how to apologize. The room remained silent. I looked around, not seeking validation, just a reason to believe I didn't have to carry this alone anymore. And now I knew I didn't. 2 weeks after the family meeting, my house returned to its original state. Quiet, clean, and free of unfamiliar footsteps crossing the wooden floors. No more yoga mats sprawled across the garden. No more overpowering scents of essential oils mixed with fake laughter echoing through the night. No more judgmental eyes every time I moved from one room to another inside my own home. I thought that silence would feel empty. But strangely, it felt gentle, like finally clearing out a room that had been collecting dust for years, too afraid to open the door. Still, quiet in the house didn't mean quiet in the family. Heather and Madison began posting cryptic messages online. Status updates like, not every family has a heart, and never give someone the power to hurt you just because they share your blood, accompanied by black and white portraits staring into the distance like they'd just survived a spiritual purge. Madison's followers started asking questions. A few defended her, but most turned sharply once I posted a single message, with clear evidence of unauthorized use of my home, and a thank you note to the legal team and city officials who helped me protect my rights. I didn't say much. Just a short post. No names. No insults. But clear enough that anyone following the story knew I wasn't the one who started it. In the comments, hundreds of strangers shared similar experiences. Some had siblings who stole their inheritance. Some were burdened with lifelong responsibility by their parents. Some had walked away in silence just to avoid tearing down the illusion of a happy family. I read every word, feeling something inside me slowly mend, as if old fractures had finally found a safe place to begin healing. One Friday evening, as I watered the plants on my porch, Jacob showed up. My little brother stood awkwardly at the gate, holding a small paper bag and a bouquet of purple tulips, Mom's favorite flower. I looked at him and said nothing. He scratched his head and stepped closer. I don't really know how to start. But if you'll let me, I'd like to say something. I nodded slightly, motioning him inside. He walked in, his eyes scanning the now neat corners of the home. He took a breath and set the flowers on the table. When we were kids, I always thought you were the strongest person in the family. You never cried. You never quit. So when everyone started relying on you, I just assumed that was normal. I sat across from him, still silent. But at the family meeting, when you played that recording, I realized how much you'd been carrying for years and none of us ever really saw it. Jacob lowered his head. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I know if I had stood with you earlier, things might have been different. I looked at him, eyes still reflecting that same innocence from the boy who once waited in the yard while Mom was in the hospital. I placed my hand gently over his. You're standing now. That's enough. A week later, I hosted my first Sunday dinner in my home, not for show, not to prove a point, but simply because I wanted to rebuild a sense of belonging, with people who chose to love me unconditionally. I personally went to the market and picked out the exact cut of meat Grandma used to grill every holiday. I called Ethan and asked what dessert he'd like. He replied, as long as it's not Madison's detox salad, I'm in. I laughed, for the first time in weeks, and felt something in my chest finally lighten. That evening, the long wooden dining table was carefully set. Grandma arrived first, carrying a homemade apple pie and a bottle of old red wine. She placed her hand on my shoulder as I opened the door. This is the first dinner in years I've gone to without having to pick sides. Jacob came next, bringing baked pasta he'd made himself. It was a little messy, but he looked proud, like a chef presenting his signature dish. Ethan arrived last, holding a bouquet of lavender and a chilled bottle of white wine. This atmosphere calls for something gentle, he said. All night, no one mentioned Heather or Madison. No one talked about social media, the lawsuit, or threw around the word family, like it was some heavy responsibility. But I knew in my heart, this was my family. When everyone left, the house went quiet again. But not the kind of quiet I used to dread. This silence felt like a choice. And I realized that from now on, anyone who crossed the threshold of this home would be someone I invited in. Not because we shared blood, but because they respected me as a person. By late fall, Seattle had slipped into its coldest but most beautiful season. Golden leaves covered the sidewalks in my neighborhood. A soft wind brushed the porch steps, carrying the warmth of clinking wine glasses in the air. I sat on the pinewood bench by my front door, wrapped in a wool blanket, white wine in hand, eyes tracing the dimming sky behind the clouds. Next to me, Ethan refilled his glass, then held the bottle toward me as if waiting for a toast. We didn't speak for several minutes. Sometimes, silence is the only thing that can prove you're finally living in a space that is truly your own. No one taking, no one invading. No need to explain yourself. My phone buzzed softly. A text popped up from a number I had already marked low priority. You'll regret this. Family doesn't forget. This isn't over. I didn't need to check the name. I knew it was Heather. I didn't open it. I didn't react. I let the screen fade on its own, like every signal from that past world no longer had permission to enter. Sometimes no reply is the clearest response. Ethan glanced over and saw me set my phone face down. He smiled slightly. Still threatening. Yeah, I said. But now it just sounds like the garbage truck out on the street. Loud but irrelevant. He nodded and took a sip. A few moments later, as the breeze softened, Ethan turned to me. His voice was low but sincere. Do you finally feel like you own it? I looked into my glass, the golden light inside catching the reflection of the porch, the door frame, and the little string lights I'd hung last weekend. I took a slow breath and said quietly, not just the house, Ethan. My life. He didn't respond, but I caught the corner of his mouth curve upward. His eyes looked at me like someone who'd just watched another survive a storm, and not just survive but rise from it on their own 2 feet. I turned toward the house. Everything was finally in place. No luggage shoved under the table. No yoga mats on the back porch. No half-melted essential oil candles cluttering the kitchen counter. Everything in this space had been chosen by me. The gray couch. The wood coffee table with its natural crack down the middle. The painting my mom had made now hanging proudly above the fireplace. I didn't need anyone's permission to keep them there. No one could tell me what needed to go. Ethan leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed. I asked, "Do you remember the first day we came to see this place?" "I do," he said. "You stared at the wall behind the kitchen for like 5 minutes and said, 'This place has potential, if it's left alone.'" I laughed. Back then I didn't realize how hard being left alone would be. "Well, no one else has a spare key anymore," he said, raising his glass like a quiet toast. I clinked my glass against his, still watching the evening settle in. Porch lights flicked on at the neighboring houses. Inside mine, warm yellow light spilled across the rug, touched the bookshelves, reflected off the mirror, as if the house itself was finally breathing a sigh of relief after a long battle. Out there, on social media and in distant corners of the family, I could still hear the whispers. The passive-aggressive posts. The snide remarks about how I'd never find a husband now. But for the first time in my life, those words didn't hurt. They couldn't touch someone who had learned how to draw a line. They couldn't reach me because I finally knew I wasn't public property. I took another sip of wine and rested my head gently against the wooden bench. Ethan asked, "Any plans for the end of the year?" "I'm thinking of hosting another dinner. But this time with our new neighbors. They have a little girl. Sweet kid, she loves the lavender in my garden." "Another guest crossing the threshold legally," he teased, and we both laughed. There was no rush in the air. Nothing left to prove. Nothing left to hold back. Everything was as clear as the dusk settling outside. Beyond the porch, the security camera blinked its quiet red light, keeping gentle watch over the boundaries I had reclaimed. Inside, I sat there, with my wine, my untaken space, and a dignity that never again needed to be bargained in the name of family. Family is forever. But self-respect is what must be protected for life. I don't know what family means to each of you. Maybe for some it's a warm place to come home to. For me, it used to be a place that kept me up at night, because of invisible demands, endless expectations, and wounds wrapped in the name of love. But I've come to understand family isn't fixed. It changes when we grow, when we learn to love ourselves properly, and when we finally dare to redraw our own boundaries. And what about you? Have you ever felt used by those closest to you, pushed into sacrifice just because you share a name or a bloodline? Have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, only to realize you were the only one hurting? If you've experienced something like this, or something completely different, I invite you to share it in the comments. I truly want to hear your story. And if this one made you reflect or recognize a part of yourself in it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I have more to share. Real stories, lived moments, about family, about boundaries, and about how a woman can finally learn to live life on her own terms.